Hi, Shannon Jackson here from Caution Artists That Play, and today I am going to talk about how I drew the birds and the branches in this colored pencil piece. Hi, and welcome to the second half of this colored pencil drawing. So today I am going to be talking to you about how I did the detailed branches in the foreground and the chickadee and the cardinal. So what I'm doing here is I am working on one of the main branches that's coming from above the birds. And this branch has a bunch of different details. So this, just like a little background, this is actually a maple tree, and of course it's winter time, so there's really not a lot going on with this tree. However, the bark has a lot of interesting details, including some moss. So what I am doing is I am just going through with my pencils. I'm keeping quite a sharp tip on the ones that I'm doing for details and a little bit more of a dull one in areas that I want to blend things out. And I'm just pretty much drawing in the darker crags of the bark, and I'm outlining my moss and other details. So I'm kind of doing what they call negative painting or negative drawing, where I am drawing the negative shapes around the positive shapes in order to create the shape of things like moss and some of the bumps and different crags on the bark itself. And the cool thing about this with colored pencil is I'm not going to blend this out completely. This is a case where the staticky look of colored pencil comes in handy. So whenever you're working on something natural like bark or rocks, it actually pays to not blend your colored pencil out completely, because you want that rough texture, because it's going to lend itself beautifully to the rough texture of bark. So you'll see in some areas on the underside I've blended it out quite a bit with white, where there's like a reflected light coming up on the branch and it's kind of washed out a little bit. But on the upper side I'm leaving a lot of that paper texture. And I'm just going in and doing these little details, paying close attention to my reference photo. It doesn't have to be exact. It will translate pretty well as is. Nobody's going to know the difference if there's a piece of moss out of place. So now I'm going into some of these branches that are behind the birds. And I'm basically repeating what I did in the branch above, but it's just on a smaller scale. And if you watched my previous video, you saw me speak about the reason why I kind of have a white halo around these branches, and that's because they're kind of frozen. They have a little bit of snow and a little bit of frost and ice around them. So I'm putting a little bit of a white halo around the branches to give them that cold look. And I apologize, it goes off screen, but I do adjust it in just a second. I'm going in with my darker browns, and then I'm coming back in and using lighter browns to pull out the lighter colors and white to pull out the whiter colors. And I actually end up using a ceramic knife coming up to scrape out some of the highlights on those branches as well. So I'm just going back and forth between my lights and darks. Sometimes I am leaving the white of the paper a little bit to show through, and then other times I'm scraping it back out after. Because even the whites are not going to be completely white in this unless it's really fresh fallen snow. See, I just scraped it out with a knife there a second ago. And I'm using a lot of dark grays, dark browns, and dark deep reds for the colors of these branches. And I'm still using the Derwent Drawing colored pencils along with my Prismacolors and my Polychromos. Mostly Polychromos for fine details, but a lot of Prismacolor and the Derwent Drawing for the actual color itself, especially in the darker areas, because soft pencils lay down really heavily, so it's easier to get them darker quicker. And I'm just going along and doing the same thing on these branches. These branches are really bumpy. They have a lot of different crags. They're actually a lot of fun to draw. Kind of like squiggle shapes inside the details. And I'm just going in with my eraser and lightening things up if I need to. As you can see there. And the little berries at the ends, the little buds, those were fun to draw too. And I tried to keep in mind that I didn't want them to be too red. I wanted it to be more of an earthy red because I didn't want them to compete with the cardinal. I wanted them to balance the cardinal, which I think that they do pretty well in the final version. I'm just going through with some gray and doing some of those details. And as you can see, in order to do the bumps, sorry, my cat just came up to me, so it's making me laugh. So in order to do the bumps on the branches, some places I'm leaving white completely because the way the light reflects on those bumps, and then I'm just doing darker on the inside of the branch itself. So you just want to pay attention to the direction of light, because that's going to help you when you draw branches or, well, anything really. If you're drawing anything outside, you want to pay attention to the direction of the light. In this case, it's kind of backlit and coming from the right side. So it's like, I don't know how to explain it. There's a lot of radiant light coming from behind, but the main light source is also coming from the right hand side. So it just kind of creates a glow around all these branches and around the birds. Pretty much just a nice, soft, snowy, wintry day where the sun wants to break through, so it's pretty bright, but it's still pretty cloudy and snowy, if that makes sense. When you do any type of natural landscape, light is a big thing. And that's one thing that really drew me to this background, is all the different light that's coming through. Even though it's cloudy, you can tell kind of like the time of day it is, and I just thought that it was really a nice, soft, pretty look. Feels cold, but nice at the same time. And I'm just going through with those buds, and you'll see me go back and forth and adjust them a lot. It's never going to be perfect the first time around. Every picture goes through an ugly stage, and when you work the same way I do, working on each little part at a time, each little piece has its own little ugly stage, or multiple ugly stages that it goes through. So you'll see me fighting back and forth quite a bit with some of these buds, just trying to get them to look the way I want them to. A lot of times I have to make adjustments from what my reference photo is, because it doesn't translate well into a drawing. So I have to make up for that a lot with my knowledge of trees and, you know, just my drawing skills in general. And I really love those red little balls at the end of these branches. It just has that fun wintry feel. I think that this drawing would make an excellent Christmas card, and I do offer prints. I have the link in the description below if anybody is interested, because this was a commission, so it has sold, but I do offer it on greeting cards and on other, you know, merchandise through Fine Art America, and I've linked that below if anybody's interested in seeing it. But I think that this would make a great Christmas card, and I might even order them for myself come next Christmas. I'm just using my electric eraser to bring out some of those light spots again. Now I am on to the main branch that the birds are actually sitting on. So if you saw my first video, you saw that I had to place the chickadee on the branch itself. So I had to really be conscious about shadow, light and shadow when it comes to the chickadee, because that wasn't in my original reference. So I'm going to have to add shadow in when I get to that part of the branch. And a lot of it I base off the way the shadow looks underneath the cardinal in my reference. But of course it's going to have less red reflecting into it, because on the branch at the other end where the cardinal's sitting, we'll have red reflecting from the cardinal. So this part of it really took a lot of imagination, including that leg, the chickadee's leg, because I didn't have that in my reference either, so I had to kind of look at other references of what their feet and their legs look like and kind of place it on the branch myself. So when you do work from references, a lot of times you're not going to draw it exactly, and that's perfectly okay. It's actually good to try and take your reference photo and make it better in your drawing. So you're always going to be making these decisions. So while references really help, and they're a good tool and a guide, they're not the end-all. Like, you can do whatever you want in your drawings. For instance, this branch here that's down at the bottom, that's coming off of the main branch and swooping down, that actually was on the upper side in my reference photo. So I didn't like how that kind of tangled up with the other branches above the birds. So instead of putting it where it was in my reference photo, I just flipped it and had it pointing down instead. And that also gave me more balance in that empty space that was below the branch and broke things up a little bit. So these are decisions that you always want to make. Just because you have a nice photo doesn't mean you can't make it a nicer drawing out of it. So and that's what I always try to do. I always look at my references and think, is there a way that I can make this composition better for my drawing? And I figure out ways to do that and then put it in. I mean, that's the magic of being an artist. You can make whatever world you want. Even if it's realistic, it doesn't have to look exactly like the photo it came from. And a lot of people don't necessarily know that many of us artists do that. A lot of people look at realism and think, oh, they just copied a photo. But that's not usually the case. Usually, a lot has changed in between the photo and the drawing. There's just a lot more that goes into the process, a lot of decision making that a lot of people don't necessarily realize. So if you're somebody who is getting realistic results, but you're disappointed that it doesn't look exactly like your photo, don't be, because it can be whatever you want it to be. I mean, there's nothing wrong with copying directly, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with your realistic artwork not looking exactly like the photo that it came from. That's why a lot of times you won't see me posting my original reference material, because it usually doesn't look exactly like it. And when I post it, if I were to post it next to my drawing, then people would think that my intention was to get it exactly like it, when typically it's not. So a lot of times I don't post my reference material. I let the drawing speak for itself once it's a drawing. So here I am moving on to the chickadee. Oh, I love these little birds. I'm such a bird fanatic. I'm a crazy bird lady. One of my favorite things to do is photograph birds and then draw them after, of course. Draw them or paint them. So if you look, I'm not going in with straight black on that cap, on the black cap chickadee, or even on the eye. I'm going in with a lot of browns and dark blues because he has a lot of these colors reflecting. He has the blue reflecting from around him, and he has a lot of the brown that's actually within his feathers. It's never straight black. Black fur, black feathers, there's always going to be things reflecting on them. It's the same with white. Black and white reflect what's around them. But black, typically, if you look at a cat, for instance, and you have a cat with black fur, if you lift their fur up and you look underneath, or you look at it in the light, a lot of times it's going to have a brown tinge or even maybe a bluish tinge. It's never straight black. So whenever I do something black, while I may use black to darken it up, oftentimes I go in with lighter colors first. Blues, browns, whatever might be reflecting, even dark greens. If this were, for instance, if this was a summer picture, I probably would have some greens in his little black cap and his chin, because most likely there would be some greens reflecting off the leaves on the trees. And the same with his beak. His beak's not actually black. There's actually some purples and some blues, a lot of dark blues in there. And then I just went into his the white part of his face with a little bit of yellow undertones as well, to warm it up a bit. And now I'm kind of drawing out where the feathers are going to be. Going in with some darker grays. In his tail feathers and his wing feathers reflect a lot of the gray around them. They're kind of that color to begin with, but I'm making sure that the grays kind of match the background a little bit. And outlining with my white and my lighter grays. And a lot of this, the white isn't completely white. It's going to be lighter grays or even some blue colors. They look white compared to the feathers around them, but they're not usually typically straight white. And a lot of the whites on this chickadee are very bright because they do reflect, obviously, the light around them. So some of the brightest parts on this piece are going to be in the chickadee. Those pure white, beautiful feathers. And I made sure when I took the reference photos, they were actually taken a day apart. So I took reference photos of the chickadee the first day, and then the second day I was able to capture reference photos of the cardinal. And it was just by chance, because I never thought that I would be able to get them during the same day or you know, even like the same time of day. And I had been wanting to do this piece for a while, but I didn't have the reference material yet, and I was just taking pictures of birds in my backyard, and I happened to get the right pictures. So sometimes it happens when you're not necessarily looking for it, because it can be difficult at times to get the references that you want when you're taking your own photos. So it just takes a little bit of patience, and sometimes it just comes to you when you least expect it. So I got really lucky with this because they were a day apart. However, I got the photos at the same time of day. So the lighting was just right. And I believe it was like the same storm that was coming through. And I actually took the reference photos, I believe it was in November. In Maine, we had some storms in November this year. So that was kind of interesting. But I think it was like the same storm that was still coming through, like, you know, for like a full 2 days or something to that degree. I don't remember exactly. However, it just happened to be the exact lighting, the right time of day, the same kind of snowy background. So the light reflecting on the chickadee was from the right direction. It ended up working out beautifully, and it made my life so much easier when I combined reference photos. Here we are, moving on to the big guy. This cardinal. Oh, he's so cute. He looks so proud. He even did in the reference photos. Oh, I love cardinals so much. Starting out with a beak, because that was the part that I thought would probably be the most challenging, and it did end up being the most challenging. And if you look, I am using kind of unexpected colors there. I'm not just using orange and yellow and red. I'm using some magentas. I am dulling it down with a blue-gray color so that it reflects what's around it. So I'm going back and forth. There's some browns in there. There are some oranges and yellows, but for the most part, the shadow areas and things like that are a magenta color. And I think at some point I might even bring some purple in too. And then, you know, the highlighted area is white, of course, on top of it because it's shiny. And then there's some blue-grays in there as well to dull things down. And I'm just going back and forth to get the right shape of that beak. And now moving on to the black areas of his face, and if you look, I'm doing the same thing. I'm actually using a dark gray or a dark blue to go in there to outline things and get that eye in. It gives him so much personality. That's one thing I look for when I'm photographing my birds, is to see if I can see the shine in their eye. That's how I know that, and obviously if I can pretty much count feathers. Not literally, but I can. That's how I can tell if I have a really clear, good reference photo. And there I go, kind of scraping things out again. Back and forth with I think that it's like a cool gray that I was using. And I go back and forth on this guy a lot, especially once I get into the reds. Reds have a tendency to wash out, especially once you photograph them or scan them, so it can be difficult to get them dark enough and get the contrast you want. But I really wanted him to be as three-dimensional as my chickadee is, so I end up going back quite a bit, especially towards the end, and I'm not even sure if I recorded it all because it was like days later. I just kept going back to it to try and get the balance in his feathers so that he didn't look washed out. It's very difficult to get the right intensity of red along with the right values of red in order for it to look three-dimensional. But I did eventually get to the point where I like it. Now I'm going in with the red. I'm outlining some of his feathers. And he has a lot of reflected things too. If you look in the back, that part that I just did has more purpley gray colors in the back, and that's because the light is kind of reflecting on his feathers. And feathers do tend to be shiny, so they will take on other colors. Even if it's a cardinal who has vibrant red feathers, he will take on other colors around him. I'm just going through and getting the detail of his head, and oh, he's so cute. I was so excited when I got to the point where I had gotten the birds' heads in. Like, it just got me so excited. And I'm being mindful of feather direction, because it changes directions as it comes down to his neck and his chest, and that's something that you want to look for whenever you're drawing any type of animal, when you're doing fur or feathers or scales. Always look for the direction. That's where you're going to get your realism. And that will also show, like, individual species as well. Like, different breeds within species might have different patterns and different fur patterns and stuff. So it's really good to look at that. Just kind of going back and forth a little bit. And I'm going back and forth between deeper reds and some orangey reds in the highlighted areas. And of course I'm using some white to go over it and some gray blues to go over it in the highlighted areas as well, because of reflected light. It's just a lot of back and forth. I'm using very light strokes, but I'm using heavier strokes in the places where there's shadow. So a lot of times I'm using the same color, but I'm just using a heavier hand in places to make it darker. Just to indicate those feathers. We're not going to draw every single feather. It's not even feasible to do that. And that would end up making him look shaggy. And there are a few phases in this where he ends up looking shaggy. Either he looks like too smoothed out or he looks shaggy. It's just back and forth, just playing with the pencils and getting it to the point where I like it. And there's like a lot of glazing too that I do. I go in with my white and then I come back over it with red a lot. And I love that underside there where the reflected light is coming off of the ground. And they're actually fairly high up in this tree, but the snow was so bright that day that it reflected on the bottom of the branch from the ground, on the bottom of the branch and on the bottom of the birds, especially the cardinal, because most of the reference is coming from the cardinal. So see, I kind of smoothed it out because I didn't really like how it was going. Once you get enough pencil on there, you can do that. Smooths out fairly easily. And I normally am not somebody who recommends smoothing anything out with your finger. You'll see that I have some bad habits here. I do tend to smooth things out with my finger. But I don't have very oily hands. I never have. And I have so many layers of pencil on there now that I know it's not going to sink into the paper. And the wax will hold up pretty well to it, especially once I put layers over it. But I don't recommend other people doing that. I know it's a bad habit, and, you know, there are times that I try and stop myself from doing it, but then there are other times when nothing works as well. And of course, I wash my hands frequently. You know, I want to make sure that I don't have anything, especially if I've used OMS. I try not to do it as much, and I try to, you know, I have something right nearby where I can wipe my hands and make sure that I don't have anything on there. So I'm just going through and doing his little tootsies. And I'm trying to make sure that I reserve some highlight on his toes as well, because they are three-dimensional, so they will have light and shadow, even though it's kind of hard to get that kind of small detail. But I make sure that I have it, or I try to. Art is pretty much an illusion, and I have said that before. We're just alluding to these different subjects. We are creating the illusion of space and the illusion of, a 3D object. So I try not to get too bogged down with my details, although I am pretty OCD about it. Here's a closer up shot of me doing the feet. But it's, it's pretty much me implying the knuckles of the feet and implying shadow. It's not going to be perfect, but it will, it'll do the job. The illusion is there. And on that detail of the branch, you can see where I left a lot of the colored pencil texture without blending, and how well that lends to the rough bark. So I'm going through my white and going into those indents that I did in my previous video with a stylus pen. You can see when I'm going over it with this colored pencil, it's staying white because I indented the paper with a stylus pen. And that I showed you that in a previous video. But it's kind of fun. It takes me back to the days of, like coloring over a penny with crayons or something. I like using that technique. And it works well for fur, works well for whiskers, it works well for grass. Like, that's an invaluable technique. And you're not really damaging the paper the same way that you risk damaging it when you're scraping it out with a knife. You're just kind of denting it in. And it works well with softer papers such as Stonehenge, which is what this is. And I have all my materials linked in the description below. So if you want to see, and here I'm just doing some touch-ups with touch-up texture and titanium white through brushandpencil.com. Putting in some snowflakes on the birds. There you can see the product. And I have that linked in the description below as well. I'm not sponsored by any of these companies in any way. These just happen to be companies I use a lot. And there's the final piece. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this and that you learned something. I love to draw birds, so this one was a lot of fun for me. And, you know, from the background to the branches to the birds, it was all the types of things that I really like to do. Thank you for watching and have a great day. See you next time. Bye. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you like what you see, please hit subscribe. Also, if you're interested in seeing more of my artwork, I'm on social media, so check out the links in the description below.